chat swishing by there with everyone saying how much they appreciated your input. So now we're going to switch and think a little bit about a different format for the Burns Conference. We're really excited to try this. I bet that if you've attended professional conferences in your disciplines, you've probably seen this format before or something like it. So we are trying a lightning round format today. This is going to go quick, I have a feeling. A lightning round format means that we have 4 presenters for 1 hour. We will pay close attention to time. I know that our presenters plan to do that, and each one will have 15 minutes. We're going to jump right in now without much delay, and I will introduce our first panelist. You've heard her voice once this morning if you've been here all day, Dr. Angela Lumpkin, the Chair of Kinesiology and Sports Management. The title of her lightning talk is Our Moral Obligation to Students, Teaching in a Pandemic and at Other Times. Dr. Lumpkin?
Thank you, Suzanne. I'm not sure what I did to deserve going after the students. They're going to show me up badly here, so well done, students. But this particular overview of the session to come has 2 parts. One, I'd like us to identify and think about what the faculty owe to our students. What is our moral obligation to them, especially during a pandemic? And then secondly, just some specific adaptations that we might want to make to enhance student engagement and learning, whether we're teaching online, hybrid, or even face-to-face in the midst of this pandemic. So what are our moral obligations to our students? And I would argue that anything less than this is simply morally impermissible, that we actually have an obligation to our students. Now, the good news is a lot of the comments that we heard from the 5 students we just listened to is that we overall are doing a really good job. Well, I would argue that that's probably not 100%. For those of you that are doing a great job, which is everybody on this particular call, keep up the great work. And for the people down the hallway or around the block that maybe you're not, maybe we can lend a hand to them. All right, so first of all, I want to start with what is our duty of care to our students. And I think we heard some of that already going on both this morning and this afternoon. We need to be there for our students. We need to offer a maybe virtual, maybe physical helping hand with gloves, of course. We need to provide some advice about how to navigate through this pandemic. And we need to overly mentor them. We need to be there for them. We need to be that solid connection back to Texas Tech that says we care. And so the first is our duty to care. Our second responsibility to our students is how much we communicate. We can never communicate too much. Melanie Hart always likes to say for online classes, it must be regular and substantive. Well, it should be regular and substantive regardless of what modality we're using. And I would say overly communicating right now. And that can be in email messages. It can be your physical presence during virtual or face-to-face office hours. We have to give our best to convince students that we care, we're there for them, and we want to help. The flexibility that was referred to in multiple sessions today speaks to that. Third thing is a little on the flip side of that, which is we need to provide students what they pay for. And that was really alluded to in one of the statements just made. We need to meet our classes, whether it's synchronously or asynchronously. We need to share our knowledge and experiences. We need to serve as an expert resource for whatever discipline we're teaching. And the format, the pandemic doesn't enter into that one way or the other. We have an obligation to be there for our students as the knowledge base, with our focus not on teaching, but our focus on learning. And I think the key thing there is we should be doing everything in our power to make sure that we never lose the focus on it's about student learning. It's not about how we teach or what we teach, it's what do they learn and how can we help them learn to think critically and develop those particular skills. We need to be organized. I think organization is something we should do all the time, whether it's in a class session or in our syllabus. Now we need to be more organized because as you heard from the students, their routine just got significantly disrupted. Their time management abilities got completely twisted around. And so did ours. So that tells us that we have to go overboard, if you will, to be organized in everything that we do. We don't need to lower our expectations for students. We do need to make them more manageable. I think one of the things that we can do there is to provide them more and more and more feedback about their work. And the more feedback that we can provide them, the easier that transition will be for our students. We need to make sure that we display everyday trust and respect for our students. We need to make sure that we're safeguarding their rights, whether it's a Title IX right or it's a FERPA compliance with FERPA right. We need to make sure that we, in the midst of this pandemic, we don't forget about their rights as students, their rights as human beings, their right to learn, and do everything in our power to do that. One of the speakers this morning talked about how important it is for modeling. Well, I would argue, I would add one term to that. Modeling integrity may be at the head of the list. We have to make sure that we are the epitomes, the role models of integrity and how we evaluate our students, the standards to which we hold our students, how we ourselves behave. We need to be there for our students. We need to help our students, but we need to make sure that we hold them to the same standard as far as academic honesty, etc. And then we need to model for our students being lifelong learners. We are all learning about technology. And it's okay to admit when we don't know something, when we failed miserably at that particular endeavor. We need to model how we accept responsibility for that. I can do better. I will admit a mistake that I've made. I will do better with the technology, but I will also be very, very understanding of my students when they're having some of the technology issues that we were just talking about. So I think to sum that up, we need to be, as best we possibly can, with all the different balls that each of us is juggling, to be what we expect our students to be, whether it's organized, whether it's respectful, whether it's coming prepared and being organized, whether it's communicating. We need to be those role models for our students in each of those things that we owe to them. All right, let me switch focuses just a second here and go into my second point, which are what are some of the adaptations that we should be making. I would suggest that one of the best things that we can do, and I've been teaching for a lot of years, I earned every one of those gray hairs. I've been teaching for a long time, and for the first time, I met individually with each of my students. Now, I happen to be teaching 2 graduate classes face-to-face, so I don't have 250, but I'm teaching right now, and I said, I'm going to try to smooth the transition of the struggles that our students are having with all the differences that are happening in their lives. I'm going to meet individually with every student, in this case, in my office, socially distancing with masks, and I was blown away with how meaningful that was to the students. And then some of you are teaching only online. We'll make that a virtual one-on-one. But I think what it showed to those students is I know where they are. I know what some of their things they're dealing with. And it really made a difference. And one of the other things I wanted to do was not only learn my students, but I wanted to get accustomed to their voices. I had the advantage last semester, mid-semester, I knew all my students' voices already. And so when we went online, I could deal with that because I was teaching synchronously. But getting to know your students right now, because if we have to make that pivot or that transition, we need to be knowledgeable about our students right now. So meeting them face-to-face or virtually, very, very important. Whatever adaptations we're making, make sure that we are communicating those, again, regularly. Somebody said earlier how important it was to have follow-up messages with our students. However we can communicate, the better, the more, the better. Making sure that our students have a sense of community. And I think we've been talking about lots of different things today, and I'm not sure that I've seen that emphasized enough. The sense of community there is they need that social connection. We heard that with our students. Because if you're teaching an online class, they may not have that. I suggest that even though it's week 4, go back a little bit and have them each do a selfie introduction. And by selfie introduction, what I'm saying is put themselves on YouTube or whatever medium they want to use. They can do it with their cell phones and introduce themselves and connect socially with their classmates. Even if you have a large class, maybe you don't listen or view all of them, but at least get some connections, because these students need that connection with each other as much as they need it with us, with what we may have to share. Make sure that we understand, and this is a very important point that I want to really emphasize, and I'm going to give Brianna Harris from biology credit for this. I had never put the word trauma in connection with the pandemic until I read an article that she and her colleagues wrote. And the point there is our students may be traumatized. They may be traumatized financially, emotionally, physically, mentally, and we have to be sensitive to that. We have to reach out with empathy. We have to make sure that we're there for our students, extensions on deadlines, understanding that when they get locked out of a quiz, they can just go back and start all over again. Whatever it might be, we have to understand that their life circumstances are such that we have to be overly empathetic, overly flexible, and very much demonstrating that duty of care to each student. Make sure that you do everything in your power to make it easier for students. That doesn't mean lowering the standards, and you can come up with lots of different things. You can shorten the length of your videos, for example. Students are not going to sit there through an hour Zoom lecture. It's just not going to keep their attention. It won't for us, so how do we expect it of them? Make sure that if we're using videos, we use some of the technology such as Edpuzzle or PlayPosit or even on Blackboard Feedback Fruits to put in some questions into our videos to enliven those so that students can get out of those particular videos what we would like. Posting our slides, making sure that every kind of review information is out there for our students to make that transition to learning even more successful. I have a list now of over 24 learning activities, and I'll be glad offline to share those with anyone that would like me to describe how to do them. But one of the things I want us to think about during the pandemic is just a Zoom class, an asynchronous video, again and again and again, is not what our students need. They need some variety. We have different learning styles. We have different needs of students, and we can't just keep doing the same thing. It was a lot easier in March because we only had about 6 weeks left. We have a 15-week semester. And if we stay put with this, that same old learning is not going to work for all of our students. And so we need a lot more variety. There's some really creative things up already on the TLPDC website. There's resources among this group that is just phenomenal. And I'll be glad to share whatever resources that I have listed down here in another venue. But the key thing is use some variety with the emphasis on student learning. I want to repeat just 2 quick things. 1, be flexible and sensitive to technology issues that students are going to have. And then ask them to reciprocate because we're going to have some too. I already have, just like you have, students that have tested positive, and we're doing Zoom, we're doing face-to-face, we're doing all these things at the same time just to make sure we're accommodating all of our students. Keep doing it and keep doing it well. But realize that some students are just not going to get connected. And then remember this kind of most poignantly. Treat each student with trust, respect, fairness, and sensitivity, especially when we realize that they are being required to adapt to a different learning modality than they prefer to. For many of us, we're teaching in ways we don't want to. We're using technologies we don't want to, and the same thing's happening to our students. So let's be very, very sensitive to them. Back to you, Suzanne.
Thank you so much, Angela. I really appreciate that. Well, next up, we're going to move right along. It's the lightning session, right? So next on our list is Drs. Sylvia Niehaus and Shara Jackson. The title of Sylvia and Shara's talk is Reflections on Teaching During the COVID-19 Pandemic, What Matters and What Worked. Shara, Sylvia?
Hi, how's everyone? Did my screen share okay? Okay, great. So I'm Shara, here's Sylvia. And today we're going to share with you what we've learned about teaching and learning during this ongoing pandemic. Okay, so switching to online suddenly created changes, not just in how we interacted with students, but also how we taught. With each option we had, there were challenges. One of the biggest challenge I experienced was being able to chat with students before and after class. You know, even kind of turning our back and kind of having that more private conversation, knowing there's another line of students. We couldn't do that in Zoom. because everybody's sitting there, they're going to hear it. It just really didn't exist without being obvious, saying, can we go to a private chat room? So it just didn't work. There was Wi-Fi and technology issues, cameras cutting in and out, cameras not working. You know, and with teaching, we had pros and cons with everything we could choose to do. You know, if you do live synchronous lectures, you know, you've got to worry about the Wi-Fi failures. Pre-recorded asynchronous lectures, you had to deal with, you know, making sure you got it done in plenty of time. It needs to be captioned or transcribed, so we're ADA compliant. If we're recording lectures and we're leaving it to watch them, they may or may not watch it. Do we care? You know, we had to make that decision, like, does it matter whether they watch this or not? If it matters, then we had to build in extra tools, like, you know, a secret question in there or something to make sure they watched it. We had students who, you know, they mentioned it, their stuff changed. Some of our students were essential workers and were suddenly working 50 hours a week, where they were working maybe 40 or 30 before that. Others suddenly were full-time school teachers with children at home, you know. And even when we had the live lectures, we had interruptions of children and, you know, adorable pets, and they were fun. But that was just kind of that reality. Some people chose to do no lectures, which that potentially hindered those students who needed that contact. You know, I heard from students, you know, students did email me and tell me they were alone. They were lonely. They wanted to know if they could work ahead because they just needed something to do. And so I felt it was important to make sure we had at least some combination of freedom to not be there if you have these burdens, but also we had to have that connection for those who are alone and lonely. And we were lucky we had freedom to make these decisions on our own. You know, there was a lot of choices. So today we're just going to kind of share what we did and what we've learned. Sylvia?
Yeah, so from my end, you know, when we learned in mid-March that we would have to switch to online, I'm confident that, you know, you could hear groans within Human Sciences building, and that came from me. You know, like one of the speakers this morning, I think the second speaker, who said that he sort of dragged, well, that he was very hesitant to embrace, you know, online teaching. I was the other person there who, you know, felt very much like that. So, and I had never done any online teaching whatsoever. So, you know, as you can imagine, I scrambled to somehow, you know, become up to speed within 2 weeks. And I have to really thank a number of people there, including Shara and Erica Brooks and Mitzi Signer and a lot of people from e-learning who somehow helped me to figure out how to do online exams and online lecture and online everything within a matter of no time. I mean, 2 weeks and I was pretty much ready to go. So, you know, but during this time, our commitment to the students really and to their learning remained strong. And, you know, I think we managed to get through successfully. But, you know, it's clear, of course, in that situation that our lectures were not geared towards online teaching. I mean, you know, I basically switched to trying to do synchronous teaching through Blackboard Collaborative Ultra. But, you know, I never designed my course, of course, at that time, specifically towards an online environment. I just tried to do what I had done before and stay afloat somehow. So, you know, with the spring semester behind me, and then actually having time to think and reflect, you know, I came to really a few conclusions here. So Shara, if you might want to switch at that point. So, you know, the big question obviously was for me, so what are actually my priorities and who is my audience? Who am I dealing with, right? And so again, you know, we had to kind of reflect on the challenges we faced, what was really essential for students to take away, and also, you know, what worked to improve things. And so I came away with really two major issues. The first one was that, and you probably think that's funny, and it really connects to a lot of the stuff that other people have said over the course of today. But the first one was really for me to, well, I came to the realization, and somewhat belatedly and ironically, that even though I teach on family relationships, that in fact family relationships should come first. That that seems a bit ironic, but somehow I think the whole crisis brought to the forefront for me what really matters, and the anxiety that my students were experiencing, the anxiety I was experiencing, and so forth. And before COVID, I thought it was students submitting their assignments on time, making sure I cover all the course content, making sure that people really did the papers. All of that seemed to be unbelievably important, even teaching APA style, right? And I have to say that during the crisis, it became very apparent to me that I really need to somehow think about, okay, what are my priorities? What really matters right here and right now? And how do I want to incorporate that in the future? And so, one of the things that I really noticed, and again, several people have commented on this before, is the idea that, during this crisis, people have been on the whole much more nice, much more understanding, much less perfectionistic. And get what? I mean, it worked out. You know what? I mean, even though it wasn't perfect, it wasn't, on the whole, I thought everything worked out. And in fact, I think it was a much nicer experience to be treating others kindly, more kindly, and in return being treated with much more understanding. So, this is something that, I took into consideration as I then later on for this fall semester have made changes in my class, and I'll talk about this in a moment. The other one is that, and again, other people have commented on this, is that I realized, a few years ago, I did a survey in my class because I teach on intimate relationships and I talk about stress and how that influences intimate relationships. And so I had done this little survey where I asked students, about the various sources of stress they experience, right? So general stress, but then also some specifically geared towards students. And and I just did this because I wanted to somehow link this then to our course content and so forth. And I was utterly shocked, truly shocked, when I realized how much these students have going on, how many jobs they work in addition to going to school, how many responsibilities they have, what kind of crises they experience. And so this semester, of course, that was even more heightened. So I feel I've become much more knowledgeable about who my students are, what they're dealing with, and also with the fact that, and that sort of happened more by coincidence, that only a very small proportion of them actually want to become like us, meaning teaching, research, and so on. Very few of them have any ambition of going to graduate school or earn a doctoral degree, and most of them in fact end up with jobs that are not in our field, where they earn the bachelor's degree, but then they use it in a particular area, but they use it in something other that may not be their field. And so part of that resulted for me in also reflecting, okay, what is it actually? I mean, if I want to be sort of student focused, where does the focus need to be in terms of content, for instance, in terms of, again, priorities? What do I want to teach? What do I want students to really take away? What can I expect from students, who are overwhelmed right now with too many responsibilities, have so much stress going on, and so on. So,
yeah. I agree, because my priorities changed too, as well. Like one of the things that I had to realize in the spring, especially, is we can't do all of the content. One of my assignments was observe infants and young children. You can't do that. So I had to cut down sort of what I was requiring. I had to evaluate and shift that. And I think that interaction and connection also became much more important in priorities One of the things I created several things in our discussion board of introduce yourself and then introduce your pets. I had a positive corner, so share something positive. If you have good news, if you just got accepted to grad school, if you've gotten engaged, share your good news. And then I also had one where if you need encouragement, if you're stressed, if you're worried and you want to put it in there, put it in there. And then I offered extra credit points if you'll participate in this board, and that got them started. But what was really amazing is how much it continued and the care they continued to show each other and connect. So they got points for their first post, but then they just kept going. And I thought that was really, really neat. Also, just kind of really understanding, you know, their stress. We had the luxury of choosing modalities, of changing a few of our classes, and we could change them all pretty much the same way, and we did what works best for us. And as you know, the students even in a previous session just mentioned, they dealt with 4 to 6 classes, changing possibly multiple different ways and having to learn multiple platforms, and that may have not even been part of their learning style because they were at the whims of our freedom and doing what was best that works for us. And as we finish up, as we kind of talk about where we've moved to, we do want you to kind of feel free to type this into the chat. What matters to you when it comes to teaching, right? Just share with each other. What's important to you? I know that we both implemented some new things. We've tried some new things. I know for me, I've encouraged attendance, but didn't really require it because I knew some were working. I tried to remove time limits or really extend time limits on exams. Tried to make sure I was available to reset exams because there was lots of exam failures, Wi-Fi failures, things like that. Sylvia?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, mostly what I've done is, well, 2 things. One is building much more flexibility into my class this semester, so that when students, you know, have unexpected things happening, when they get ill, a family member gets ill, whatever, really doesn't matter, that there are multiple options for them, so that if they can't do an assignment at that time, but they don't have, you know, an official excuse, let's say, that, you know, they are still able to make up for it in other ways. So I've built much more flexibility into my classes, and that seems to help as far as I can tell so far. And the other one is that this semester, I'm pruning a lot of my course content, and I'm really trying to keep my priorities straight. I mean, this year I'm really trying to do this much more deliberately than I did in the spring, where I basically just reacted and tried to somehow stay afloat and didn't really have time to think through a whole lot. So I've been more deliberate in all of that.
Yeah. And so just real quickly, I want to share you just a couple of things we've tried. If you haven't used Flipgrid, as my students tell me, it's kind of like a TikTok for education panel. And so they have to talk. So an example, every module, each student needs to go on and give a highlight. What's most important and why? 60 seconds. And I encourage them to respond to each other. I've also changed my office hours to student hours, and I have a lot more students coming in. And I think the really exciting part is all of a sudden I'm getting more of our distance learning students feeling like they're connected to tech and they're more engaged. And that's been really, really neat as well. And then, you know, just other changes that I've tried and done, and I've got some things that work and things that didn't work, and I kind of like the way I've redesigned my discussion boards, and so it's been kind of a fun process of really challenging myself. And I think we're pretty much out of time, but we would like you to also think about, you know, what has changed. We asked you to reflect in the chat group, and but also like what has changed for you and how you, when you reflect back, how has your teaching changed? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shara and Sylvia. We really appreciate that. And you've got great comments in the chat. Definitely achieving your goal of asking others to reflect. So thank you for leading us. We're transitioning quickly and moving on now to our third presentation in our lightning round. Dr. Jenna Lafraniere is next. The title of her talk is Examining and Communicating Expectations. Jenna?
Thank you. Well, I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Communication Studies, and I'm excited to talk with you during this session about communicating expectations, which are so important, and yet so often we don't give them enough attention as we plan our teaching. So I hope that today I can help you with that by sharing what I've learned during this switch to more online instruction. I have two goals for you today. First, I hope that you can consider how you communicate expectations to your students. And I think that a lot of the previous panelists have really led into this nicely too and touched on some of this for us. The second goal is setting expectations for yourself, and particularly I want to talk a little bit about self-care and just some things that I've learned since going online. So my first thing here for you to do is actually going to be a little activity, and you can just post this in the chat really quickly. But what are your expectations in a drive-through experience? When you're thinking about fast food, what are some of the expectations that you have for them or that they might have for you? So take a moment and throw something in the chat. Excellent, lots of speed. I'm liking this. You're like, give me the food and give it to me quickly, please. Perfect. So while you're thinking about that, I wanted to give this to you so that you could be thinking, you know, it provides us this example where our expectations for drive-through fast food, things that we probably do pretty often, are so numerous. You know, if you look at the chat box even, you know, there are expectations everywhere that we're going to go through that drive-through probably in our car, not on our bicycle or by foot or a skateboard, and that they're going to give us our food, the food that we ordered, and that we're going to pay for it, that they're going to give us the change back if we give them too much money. But there are all kinds of expectations that we don't necessarily think through all the time, but we know are there. We know if someone has not met those expectations when we're going through the drive-through. And oftentimes, I think, especially because we're hungry, a lot of times people are pretty frustrated at the same time when those expectations aren't met. And so the reason I give you this example is for if we have this many expectations for something like fast food and the fast food experience, how much more emphasis should we be putting on expectations, and how many more expectations are there for us and our students in something as important as education? So I want to touch first on being aware of assumptions. Since moving online, I've learned the importance of focusing on setting expectations for my students. This includes really a heightened awareness of my own assumptions so that I can better explicate ideas for my students. Moving online intensifies the need for being explicit, for having clarity, and so I spend more time going over directions and asking what questions I can answer. We all have expectations during our class periods for cameras being on, maybe, what you're looking for in terms of their participation, time limits for group work activities, due dates, all sorts of things. So it's important to think through those in advance and actually communicate them. Many times I've had a student turn something in, me wondering silently what they were thinking, only to go back to my directions and realize that I hadn't explicitly stated that I wanted the 1-inch margins or double spacing, or for them to choose from this select pool of topics that I thought was obvious. So I'm learning, don't go into it assuming that they know. Rather, go in with the assumption that they don't, and clarify for them what you're looking for. And I think that Dr. Lumpkin said this earlier in her presentation, you know, you can't over-explain, you can't over-communicate. And so I appreciated that. We get a better product when we clearly lay out expectations up front, letting people know what we want from them. And this might sound really easy, but we often don't realize how many expectations we have until those expectations aren't met, leaving us flustered or frustrated in the end. In communication studies, we refer to this phenomenon as expectation violations, and such violations can often be our fault when we stop to consider that we may never have actually communicated what we wanted in the first place. Another place that helps in understanding where students are in terms of understanding your expectations is to simply ask. Asking what questions can I answer opens the floor for students to respond. It says that you have an expectation for there to be questions, and it shows an assumption that they likely have questions. It's more invitational. I found this to work wonders in getting my students to ask the questions that others in the class likely have too, and then I can answer that question for everyone. When considering assignments, it's important to think about expectations on a larger scale too. And I think our last presenters hit on this a bit, so that was a really nice lead into this as well. In planning out and announcing your assignments to students, it's important to step back and think, what do I want students to absorb from this project? Then focus on the expectations for making that happen. Is your goal for them to apply something, to identify something, to create something new or specific? Starting at the root of your goal for them, you can better design and explain to students not only what you want from them, but why it's important that they do this or learn from this. And this helps to set their expectations for a final product and how they can go about achieving that best outcome for themselves. In a lot of my classes, my goal is to have them connect communication theories to the world around them. In my assignments, I specifically set out to have them draw from examples in media and music, things that they're normally going to be involved in. And in doing this, while these assignments, at least I think, are enjoyable for them, I also try to be really explicit in my directions, and I'm learning that online there's that need for that even more, to explain so they can begin seeing, why we're doing this is to learn about the theories better, to remember the theories better, and so forth and so on. And I believe that expressing those expectations, my expectations for the goals that they should have, gives them something to aim for and insight into what I'm looking for at the end of the day in an assignment, beyond just the details in font sizes or margins, but really at the heart, what is my expectation for them to get out of this project? Additionally, in really clarifying your goal-driven expectations for students, you might discover that there's a better route for achieving that end goal. And I know I've experienced that a bit online here. What is it that I'm really wanting out of this? And maybe there's a different way to go about it or a better way to go about it. So maybe you're going to have a complete redesign of what you've been doing for years, and this is giving you the opportunity to do that. Since moving online, another place that I've noticed needed more clearly communicated expectations was in discussions regarding time. So I think, sitting through the student panel, this is something that they mentioned several times. And so I think it's really important for us to keep in mind as we're teaching. We need to keep in mind what's realistic for our students. We now have students who are in vastly different schedules. They're in synchronous classes and asynchronous classes, hybrid classes, face-to-face classes. And I think that due dates can become scrambled really easily between all of these classes for them. So reminders of the expectations for due dates, expectations, means of submission will help clarify their path to success. An example for me from this was last semester when we went online in the spring. I had my assignments due in Blackboard at the start of class time, just like my students would have brought a paper copy into class and turned it in at the beginning of class up on the podium. And I thought that this would help to keep in line with the same regimen that they'd been following with me before. And then it changed. All of a sudden, I had multiple students that were lost. They thought that because most of their other classes had moved deadlines on Blackboard to midnight, that all professors had done that. And so my students were like, they weren't reading the syllabus for it. And so for me, that was a really big indicator that, you know, I need to communicate more about their due dates and that process for submission. And made me much more of aware than moving past that it's on the syllabus line of thinking to what do I need to do to make it sometimes painfully obvious in my classes what my rules are, what my expectations for submissions in terms of time are, and even how to submit it. And what might sound redundant to me might be the first time that another student is really picking up on it and maybe getting it, you know, through their minds what this is going to look like, where I'm doing this, me actually showing them on Blackboard, like pulling it up and, you know, here it is, this is where you're going to submit it, these are the directions, and pointing that out for them, because I think it's important for us to remember that some students are new to Blackboard, some are new to online learning. They might be unfamiliar with the terminology that we use, kind of the Blackboard lingo that we have. And so we can't assume that all of our students are proficient at navigating that. Also communicating those deadlines through multiple channels, announcements on Blackboard, email, in-class verbal reminders, setting the due dates in Blackboard so they get reminders, highlighting them in your syllabus. And as you can recall, my second goal for you today in this presentation involved expectations for you. So I wanted to talk about this with the time that I have left, the last few minutes. As much as we think about our students and their needs, I think it's also important that we consider expectations for ourselves as instructors. Now that you're online, what's a healthy amount of work that will come from the changes that you make in your online classes, even if they're just hybrid or partially online? Little changes can have lengthy consequences, especially as most of us probably typically teach face-to-face classes and are used to designing our assignments around that. It's easy to lose sight of this and then kind of find ourselves trapped when it's too late to go back and make new changes. So thinking through that, how long will it take you to get everything set up online the way that you want it? If you're recording videos, you know, adding in that time for editing, for cutting things out, and that's going to take time. What's your expectation for grading and returning? For some people, it takes a lot longer to grade things online. So for me, I found myself that I found it very helpful to have really detailed grading rubrics, where now when I grade papers, I can highlight things easily on the grading rubric and then add some notes in. And it's become a much easier process for me grading online when I'm typically grading papers and able to circle things and draw out notes on there. That's been a system that's helped me. But taking that into consideration, student meeting time, and I'll talk about this a little bit too here on the next slide, the last slide, but I've noticed since moving online that students just often have a lot more questions. It's easy for them to get distracted online. It's easy for technology not to work, for there to be static, for someone at home to be talking to them. And so I've found that I'll end up with a lot more meetings with students than I had previously. So I think that part of this is setting expectations for those communication locations. What is the best platform for addressing student questions or issues? Is the issue something that could be addressed better in a class forum instead of one-by-one? And so for me, I've noticed that if I have several students coming to office hours and asking the same sort of questions, that it's easier for me to kind of push the pause button, send out an email to the whole class, and then to give them my expectation that, hey, we're going to talk about this more next class period, and I'm going to give you all the details then. And that way I know if there's an issue that's coming up several times, rather than having all 51 of my students setting up hours with me to meet, because that's not going to leave me time to have a work day, to be productive, to have work-life balance. That addressing that in the class, then sending them an email and telling them, hey, we're going to talk about this, don't worry, we're going to cover it in more detail next class period, is really helpful. And then the last thing that I have for you, I think in terms of considering work-life balance, is that a lot of times it's easy for us to feel constantly that we need to be available. And I think sometimes our students might think that too, and because we're online. And so I think it's important for us to draw those boundaries and remember that we're going to be better for our students if we're able to function better ourselves. So, making sure that you're giving yourself time, that you're not working after 5 or after 6 or whatever your cutoff time is for the day. And so I think ultimately in a season where students and instructors are all learning, I think the most important thing is to have grace and patience with each other. Good communication helps both parties in learning patience and practicing graciousness with ourselves and with our students. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jenna. Our last lightning round participant today is Dr. Brock Williams. Dr. Williams' title is Using Learning Assistants in Online Environments. Jenna will stop sharing her screen and that will allow Brock to get his PowerPoint up. There we go. Brock, we'll turn it over to you. Brock, I think maybe your microphone is muted.
I think I was still muted. Hang on, let me find the right button to unmute myself. There we go. So I for lots of reasons, I appreciate one of the themes that showed up in the student section where they were talking about having grace with ourselves and with students as they deal with technology problems. So I've been using Zoom for ages, right, and teaching and stuff. Today is the first day in like 2 years where I've had Zoom crash on me repeatedly all day. So I'm sitting here with if you notice, I'm logged in twice. I got my laptop here in case this thing breaks mid-conversation. And that's especially been helpful to me today because I'm right now in my synchronous online Calculus 2 class giving their first exam. And so I have been dealing with a flood of students with connection problems because they can't get Proctorio to work, and Proctorio doesn't have a strong enough signal, and on and on and on. So, so I've had to have lots of grace with students with lots of problems. So I want to talk about the learning assistant stuff with you because this has been a great way that we have found that's also helped students. And so let me sort of explain what learning assistants are and how this works. So learning assistants are other undergraduates who help the students during class, typically on group activities. So not exactly like SI leaders or outside tutors, but they're helping, during class. And this was sort of pioneered in physics at Colorado and some places that have gotten into this. But the reason why I think it's been so effective for us, the reason why I got so excited about trying this, was the typical sort of thing when I'm teaching a Calculus 2 class, right? I'm standing at the front of the screen with my PowerPoint, I'm talking and trying to get the students engaged. And we, in the spring, say, before we were all socially distancing, had the students all packed into a big section, in like sardines. And they're all sitting there and they listen and they try, right? But I mean, there's only so much excitement that they, will have for integration using trig substitution or something. No matter how hard you work, right? Just sitting there watching someone else do it doesn't necessarily incite them. And so then you start to see, cell phones pop up, and there's always, somebody in the back that's just watching Netflix, and they, you can tell they don't even care, that, completely checked out. And so the normal way in the past that I would have tried to get around this is lots of group things. So I'd have them working in groups and talking to each other and trying to engage with the material. And of course, I'm moving around. And as you do that, right, then you see the cell phones disappear where you are. But of course, as you move around and help other people, then, then maybe they zoom back out again. So the wonderful thing about the learning assistants is when we have them come into the class, right, so they would move into the class while we're working on these group activities, and they acted like, Ken loves to call this sort of like little cell tower repeaters, right? So they're sort of mini versions of me. And so one thing, by the students recognizing that these learning assistants are there, then you start to see the cell phones and other distractions go away because there's somebody else near them watching and engaging with them. But more importantly, they're having these conversations with the students, right? Answering their questions, asking them questions, right? Even more importantly, getting them to think through the material on their own. And so then suddenly what you see is something more like this, where everybody is engaged with the material all together. Oh, okay, so this has just been absolutely wonderful. And so how did we manage to do such a thing, right? Where do we get these undergraduates and how do we pay them and stuff? So this has been supported by noise grant that we have. The point of the noise grant is to recruit future high school teachers. So from the government's point of view, the learning assistants are just there as a recruiting tool to see if anybody who serves the learning assistant, we could draw them in to maybe becoming a high school teacher. And of course, from my perspective, that's awesome, but I'd also like to see these learning assistants help my current students in my classes. And so that's one reason why Ken Griffith and then Levi Johnson from the TLPDC STEP program and from True have also helped support some of this, especially in the summer, because this helps both the students who are in the class, right, as they're getting more engagement with the material by working with a learning assistant. It's also a huge help for the learning assistant because well, as we all know, right, you learn the material much better the second time through when you're teaching it to someone else than when you first, sat through it yourself. So when we were doing this in the spring, it was amazing. We were over in what I still want to call petroleum engineering, but now it's industrial engineering. That tells you how long I've been here. This is a great room with room for 120 students. So we had 12 tables with 10 students at each table. And we had 12 learning assistants who were working the sides tables and one sort of floater in the middle. And I could walk around from group to group. And it was awesome. There were these little communities that had sort of sprung up in working with their learning assistants and talking to people. And then, of course, spring break happened. And we all had to move everything online. And so everything moved into Zoom with Zoom breakout rooms. So the way that we worked this was we would have one breakout room for each of the learning assistants. And we would assign the students to the breakout room with the learning assistant that they were most used to working with. I had a Google poll where they could tell me who they wanted to work with more often. And so that worked great. The students could still go to the breakout rooms. I would lecture in the main Zoom room and go through my slides, but then I would have lots of group activities, lots of problems for them to go work on. And at the end of the semester, the grades were a lot better. So just to give you some idea, the without LAs section is from several years ago, and the modality wasn't exactly the same because it was a bigger class and some things, but it was the closest class that I've taught, right, to the one I taught in the spring. And so what you see as the semester went along, the grades got much better, right? And I think a lot of that was getting comfortable with the learning assistants and getting used to the idea that they were supposed to work in class, right? They were supposed to engage with the material in class and not just copy stuff off the board. Right? So that was really great. I was super excited about this. And we were excited to see the difference that it made, not just in the LAs, but also in the students in the class. So we had tried this again this summer, right? So this is a high impact educational practice, right? And so one of the things that we got money from True and TLPDC worked with us with all this sort of stuff to support these learning assistants. And it worked okay. In fact, I'll show you exactly it worked really well by the end. But the first hiccup we hit was this. The class was online from the beginning. So the students didn't have that chance to build a face-to-face relationship with their LA like they did in the spring before spring break. So once they had a relationship with their learning assistant, they were all snap facing each other and stuff, whatever it is that people their age do, and I'm too old to do. Outside of class, they all knew each other, and that worked great in the spring. In the summer, less so, right? Because they only saw their LA by Zoom and only when we were having class. And so the symptom of this, of course, is too many of the students would turn off their camera and then they'd tune out, right? So what you would see is you would say, hey, we're going to the breakout rooms, and then someone would just never go to the breakout room, right? It was clear that they just weren't there. So I wanted to mention one of the tricks that we found, and it wasn't my idea at all. This was a collaborative discussion with the learning assistants, because I met with Ken and with the LAs every week, and we talked through how the class was going, what was working with their groups, what the material that was coming up was, what was tricky about it, and things to emphasize. And trying to address this problem of keeping the students engaged over Zoom, they came up with a really great idea. And what we ended up doing was D&D dice, right? So part of my teaching persona, the part of me that I show my students, right? And it's not very difficult to show them my nerdy side, right? And so, in fact, I've got my, my player's handbook and whatnot, here next to me, and I keep it there on purpose so students can see it and relate to the nerdy part. So what I would do is go to the breakout rooms and have the students work on a problem with their LA. Then when they came back, I would roll one of my dice and pick up a room at random, and then, or at least pseudo random. If a group didn't get asked, after a while, I'd fake it, right? Because they couldn't see my roll. And then I'd roll for a student in that group. And if the student that I rolled up could answer the question and explain it correctly, not just tell me the answer, but I wanted them to explain it correctly. If they could explain the answer correctly, then the whole group got one extra homework point. Right? So it didn't really affect their grades very much because there were 1,030 possible homework points. So getting a handful of points here or there didn't really change things. But of course, it felt like, right, I've accomplished something. I've shown how much I can learn. And by giving the whole group a point, if one member can answer the question, it gave everybody an incentive to make sure that everybody in the group knew how to do the problem before they left the breakout room. So because of all of this, I'll give you an idea of what happened. So the way that Calculus 2 in the summer has historically gone, we get a lot of students who, this is based on what they post in the chat box when they introduce themselves, but you get a lot of students who it looks like, and this is anecdotal and this is what it looks like, but it looks like they failed in the spring, right? They took Calculus 1 in the fall, they Calculus 2 in the spring and failed, or didn't make a C, right? Then they plan to take it again in the summer, and they sign up for it online because maybe they've seen online classes in high school and they think they're going to be easy. So they sign up in the summer, and maybe just to tell their parents, I'm going to catch back up and it's all going to be fine. And what typically happens is they don't stick it out, right? So 2 summers ago, I had 62 students, 27, that's 44%. Took the final. The rest just disappeared by the end. That's not the way that classes normally work in the fall and spring, but in the summer, that's often how it works. This summer was still atrocious, right? But at least 71%, so that was much, much better, right? Stuck with the class, right? And actually took it instead of just signing up for it to, I think, make their parents happy and get them off their back while they were home for the summer. So this was much better, and I think what caused this was having the learning assistants there to help them engage with the material, answer their questions, keep them on task, right? And show them that someone their age, right, could learn this material and succeed at this too. So that was it.
Well, kudos, Brock. Thank you so much for sharing that strategy with us. I love hearing about some Dungeons and Dragons dice in the classroom. I mean, that was awesome. Thank you for jumping in there. We love seeing the Learning Assistant program spread across the campus. It's been really exciting to see students interact with the LAs, and LAs change too. So thank you. What a great day we have had. I'm going to pass to Dr. Lumpkin. I believe that perhaps she might just give us a word of encouragement as she closes out our conference.
Thank you, Suzanne. I just want to say again, on behalf of the Teaching Academy, how much we appreciate our 3 speakers this morning, our 5 students facilitated with former chair of the Teaching Academy's Executive Council, Bob McDonald, for organizing that, and then the 4 sessions for this afternoon. Kudos to Suzanne and Bob and Patrick for organizing today. And we just saved, must have been $10,000 for Texas Tech by not bringing in this external speaker. And they don't even have to pay us. So total savings of money. I want to mention one other thing, just in case some of you might be interested in helping out. The Teaching Academy has a new initiative this year. It's the Teaching Academy's Commitment to Teaching. And we're doing 3 things to try to show our commitment to teaching. First of all, Allie Duffy from Visual and Performing Arts is leading an effort to welcome our over 100 new faculty this year. They didn't get a full-blown new faculty orientation. They don't get to go to meetings, whoop-de-doo. with all of their colleagues in their departments or other places. But if any of you have an interest in wanting to welcome some of our new colleagues, just contact me or Allie, and we'll get you involved. Dom Casadante from chemistry is leading our second initiative, which is welcoming new students with an emphasis on first generation students as well. Again, if you'd like to help with that initiative to try to make sure that our new students are retained because they understand how much teachers care, just contact me or contact Dom and we'll get you involved. And then thirdly, Courtney Myers from Agricultural Communication and Education is leading the peer evaluation of teaching. We believe in teaching quality and we want to engage as many people as possible in that initiative. So if you have any interest in that, contact Courtney or myself, or if you forget about everyone's name, just contact Suzanne and she'll get you connected to the right people. And the one other thing I might mention, if any of the presenters today or those of you who were mostly silent would like to do a podcast or a webinar about any of the strategies that you're using currently through the pandemic or otherwise, just let Suzanne know and we'll facilitate that. Again, thank you all very much for attending and how much you hung through the entire day. Have a safe and restful, taking care of yourself weekend. Bye-bye.